We are conditioned to read ancient literature sequentially. We start at page 1, read chapter by chapter, expecting a linear narrative to guide us to the end. But applying that habit forces a completely artificial structure onto the text. Structurally, this ancient text functions as a non-linear relational database. Central to this architecture is an internal methodology called Tasreef. Derived from the Arabic root meaning to turn or distribute, Tasreef is the deliberate strategy of breaking down a core concept and shifting its themes, parables, and linguistic roots across multiple, disconnected chapters. The text claims total authority over its own interpretation. It promises to explain itself entirely from within. But executing that self-explanation requires the reader to track thousands of scattered data points simultaneously, a task that quickly exceeds the hard limits of human cognitive memory. Treating a complex, non-linear dataset as a simple linear story guarantees systemic misunderstanding. When human readers fail to hold the entire web of variations in their mind at once, they introduce informational gaps they inevitably fill with their own external biases. For 14 centuries, manually tracking every cross-reference and subtle linguistic shift across 114 chapters required a lifetime of intense memorization. The human mind is simply a bottleneck for processing this volume of nonlinear data. Modern large language models and multidimensional vector spaces operate on the exact semantic relationships required by the text. They do not read sequentially, they read relationally. Where a human reader takes months to map a single concept from Surah 6 to Surah 75, an AI maps the entire mathematical architecture of the Arabic lexicon instantaneously. This visualizes the output. Artificial intelligence provides the computational scale necessary to process a 1,400-year-old semantic network. Applying high-powered machine learning does not alter a single letter of the scripture. It simply provides the processing power necessary to finally observe the rigorous, self-correcting architecture that was coded into it from the beginning. To understand how this engine works, we have to look at the text's own rules. In Surah 75, verse 19, the Quran establishes its primary axiom. God explicitly assumes sole responsibility for the text's bayan, its clarification and explanation. By claiming that the explanation is a divine duty, the scripture establishes a closed hermeneutic loop. The data required to understand the text is strictly contained within the text itself. If the duty of clarification resides with the author, then the rules for that clarification must be intrinsic to the text. This shifts the primary source of meaning away from external 7th century historical reports and onto the text's own internal definitions. The active mechanism to deliver this internal clarification is found in Surah 6, verse 65. The text commands the reader to observe how it diversifies the signs, executing tasreef, to shift angles, varying the context to spark human intellect. It scales this variation across the entire corpus. Surah 17, verse 89 states that the text exhausts every kind of example and parable. By attacking a concept from every conceivable angle, the system systematically eliminates ambiguity. The intended output of this scattering is defined in Surah 25, verse 33. For any question raised, the internal system yields the absolute best explanation. This flowchart maps the internal framework. We start with the divine promise, necessitating a functional tool, flowing directly into a supreme output. To achieve that perfect output, complex concepts cannot remain static. They must be deliberately dismantled and scattered across the chapters. This scatter and rebuild methodology forces the reader to synthesize multiple data points. The resulting composite reconstruction leaves zero mathematical room for internal contradiction. The scripture is explicitly engineered to self-explain. It breaks its own lessons apart so they can be cross-referenced, tested, and rebuilt into absolute clarity. The theory is flawless, but the execution hits a wall. A single Arabic root might appear hundreds of times across 114 chapters, shifting in grammar, tone, and context. Manually tracking those variations without omission is historically impossible. Because human readers could not process the total volume of data, they analyzed fragments. These isolated readings created informational vacuums, and for centuries, competing sectarian biases eagerly filled those gaps. This violates the text's physical definition. Surah 39 describes the revelation as mathaniya, a perfectly consistent structure, yet constantly repeating, paired, and turned back on itself. This node graph visualizes the semantic web of Mathania. A single isolated verse is never a complete thought. It branches downward, mathematically tethered to variant themes across the book. Tracking how these specific variations shift allows them to cross-pollinate, refining the precise meaning. If you read an isolated verse and ignore its paired variations, you bypass the text's self-correcting mechanism. Isolated analysis is incompatible with a dataset structurally built on pairings. To read the text accurately, the entire network must be queried at once. Artificial intelligence directly solves the historical bottleneck. What a scholar attempts to hold in their memory, a computational engine manages instantaneously across massive semantic arrays. Large language models are built on the exact logic the text utilizes. They map distance, proximity, and structural relationships between words in nonlinear space. But to ensure accuracy, the AI must be governed by a strict methodological constraint, intra-Quranic hermeneutics, interpreting the text strictly by the text. We program the AI agent to query only within the boundaries of the internal Arabic corpus. It is explicitly instructed to reject external literature. Imposing this hard boundary completely bypasses human philosophical and cultural insertions. The machine operates exclusively on the raw data of the scripture. The execution follows 3 steps. Step 1, we isolate a specific linguistic root or structural concept within a single verse. Step 2, the AI queries the entire multidimensional vector space, pulling every instance of structural variation and thematic pairing from the text. Step 3, the model synthesizes those internal data points, allowing the intersecting verses to naturally define, clarify, and restrict each other to answer the original query. This automated, clean synthesis strips away centuries of fragmented manual interpretation. The algorithm simply enforces the rule laid out in Surah 25. By aggregating the scattered variations, it lets the text bring forward its own best explanation. AI democratizes the methodology. It performs in milliseconds the precise nonlinear tracking that once required exhaustive, lifelong scholarship. This methodology extends far beyond language. Look at this atmospheric simulation. The cyclical, shifting motion of global wind and storm currents operates on continuous variation. In Surah 2, verse 164, the exact word Tasreef describes the dynamic turning of the winds. The physical universe utilizes the identical mechanism of deliberate variation. In Quranic terminology, a verse of scripture is an āyāt, a sign. A physical phenomenon in nature is also an āyāt. They are twin datasets. Both express profound truths, not through static events, but through cyclical, structural recurrence. Modern AI becomes a disciplinary bridge. It reveals a singular reality where the systemic, scattered design of the text flawlessly mathematically mirrors the observable cosmos. We are left with 3 interacting pillars. The text provides the conceptual vocabulary. The universe provides real-world validation, and AI maps the patterns between them. But to execute the final synthesis, the system requires a mandatory central component, the conscious human intellect. Machines can track the linguistic roots, and the natural world can display the physical vectors, but an algorithm cannot experience insight. It cannot internalize moral weight. The text explicitly demands human cognitive engagement. It requires tadabbur, profound analytical reflection that tracks consequences past the surface of the words. Warning. Grave is not a neutral act. It is a severe intellectual and spiritual impairment. Failing to reflect places heavy locks over the human mind. By following the threads of Tasreef, a reader tests the text's claim of internal consistency. As thousands of scattered variables align into a contradiction-free web, the structural integrity of the system becomes observable. The modern seeker stands exactly at the center of this triad. By leveraging computational tools, we do the heavy lifting of data sorting, leaving the human mind free to translate those raw patterns into ethical clarity. The Quran functions as a self-illuminating grid of information. Modern technology reveals the depth of that design, providing the clarity to navigate its internal landscape.